Hello.
Hello.
My name's Amanda McLoughlin. Nice to meet you.
I'm Eric Silver. Hello.
That's us. We are going to be talking today. It's weird to do this with no one talking back to you, but we have a YouTube chat going where you can leave your comments and questions. We're here to tell you some stuff, but also to answer questions. So please don't be shy and say hello and prove to us that there are people watching, which is always a nice feeling when you are doing something.
That's true. We're here to talk about podcasts and specifically to have people to make podcasts with. We have those people at Multitude, which is an audio collective and studio where we make shows about the things we love and for the people who love them too.
Yes, there are 6 of us that make up the hosts of Multitude. We are a bunch of people who own our own podcasts, who started them independently, and then came together to share resources and to help each other grow. So it came together very naturally in lots of the ways that we're going to talk about, helping each other out and making podcasts with others, even when it's not your full-time job, which it wasn't for me until we started doing this Multitude and working for ourselves.
For sure. I think the best thing to do to start is to talk about what our jobs are.
Yeah. So I am the CEO of Multitude Productions. That is the LLC that provides services for all of the podcasts that make up members of the Multitude Collective. So all our podcasts are owned by their hosts. And what I do as CEO is services. I sell ads for all of the shows and collect a small commission, and that makes up most of the revenue for Multitude, the company. We do things like help people with their marketing, with their event planning. We host live shows together. We have a membership program where people can pledge money to Multitude itself to help us grow. And we have a studio here in Brooklyn, New York, where we share recording equipment and workspace and literally just a big giant table that you can like mail shirts on or write postcards or just do your work, which in small apartments is hard to come by. And what else am I forgetting? Well, we also do production services and consulting. So with all of us now have more than, 20 years of experience at this point in podcasting altogether. So we can do things like help a company start a podcast or teach a nonprofit or school or radio station or a show how to market or make money from their podcast more effectively. So as CEO, I kind of organize all that stuff. I keep the admin, the finance, the business development growing and going, pay the rent, and that's the bulk of my job.
True. My job is I'm the head of creative. Now you would be thinking, well, aren't podcasts all creative? Well, partially. I think my job as head of creative for all of Multitude is making sure that everybody's editorial work and creative work on their shows is to the best of their ability and to make it even better. So I oversee all of the shows, and people can bounce ideas off me as I help our shows grow and change as we keep going. I mean, some of our shows have over 150, 200 episodes. So it's important for us to figure out what we're doing as we go through. Also, as we make new shows, I am the one who heads the pre-production. I spend a lot of time thinking about what makes our show stand out. How is it different than every other show out there? And we do this in so many ways. We've done this in our initial 3 shows with Join the Party, a Dungeons and Dragons podcast, Spirits and Mythology podcast, and Potterless, a Harry Potter podcast. And independently, we found the niche in which we wanted to occupy. But then with the 4 new shows that we've started, I really needed to figure out how we were going to stand out as the podcast landscape grew. So Horse, which is our basketball podcast, is about exploring the beef and the stories behind basketball, while so many other shows have done just focused on data and it focused on really drilling in basketball news, only for true fans. And we've done this in so many other ways, as we've done a debate show, which is now exclusive to our multi-crew members, as we've made an audio sitcom, Next Stop, and as we've made a game show about children's crime novels, which has been very, very fun. It's meddling adults. So that's my job, and it's really fun. And I like that people give me, that Amanda has given me the ability to do this job. Oh, and I'm the head of putting all the live shows together as well.
Yes, it's creative is a big word that applies to almost everything in podcasting.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really good representation of why Multitude works and why we wanted to talk about building a team, because there is somebody on your team who hates spreadsheets less than everybody else, or like me, maybe even likes them.
Right.
There is somebody who you want to run your copy by, or your tweets, or to say, hey, this is my idea for an episode. Is there a way that could be stronger? And Eric is a really versatile person that we can come to with all kinds of ideas, and he comes up with ideas himself to make Multitude stronger, both in our existing shows and also the things that we are looking to do going forward. And I should say that multitude.productions is our website. We have written dozens of articles about what we do and how we do it. There are templates, there are spreadsheets, yes. And if you are a podcaster or hoping to become one, you are going to find helpful stuff there for you for free. So please go check it out.
Yeah, you can also follow us at Multitude Shows, and we can put both of those things in the chat. I can do that as I ask you this question, Amanda.
Yes.
I think it's important. Why is it important to have someone who likes the thing that they do? I think that what you said about being the person who hates spreadsheets the least, because we are a small business or just not a giant company. I remember hearing an interview with someone who was just running a small podcast business. It was like, we just want to put the art first. Like, how is it important to have someone who's responsible for business things?
I see myself as someone who helps creative people get their stuff done. And that to me is really fulfilling. That's as fulfilling as doing my own creative projects and contributing to my own podcasts. And that is like the thing that is satisfying for me, like taking care of our ad sales and invoicing our sponsors and helping each of the shows do accounting and keep track of their money is not like the thing that I dread at the end of the week that I have to do before I get to go home. It's something that I'm excited to do on Mondays because I get to make sure that every dollar that we earn is accounted for and goes toward keeping our hosts compensated or making the show better and making the show grow. That's not true of like writing social media copy or of even planning out and structuring episodes. Those are things that I dread and kind of make me sweat. So being able to come in and work on the things that I know I am good at and put my specific talents, however niche or weird or particular they are, to use for everybody else just makes me feel better about myself and better about my workday.
I think that having a business person,
yeah,
and I mean, we have a CEO because we are a company, but we are taking ourselves seriously as a business, which is something that you need to do when you are small. Even if you are one person, you are still like a one-person LLC. And I think that taking yourself seriously as a podcast business is essential because why does Joe Rogan get $100 million for no reason just because lots of people like him when he says that? Microchips control. I don't really listen to it.
I have no idea.
It's something about microchips. I don't know. He's doing something in your brain. But I think that taking yourself seriously is really important, and that's why having a CEO is good.
It is. And I mean, that is why this is my job now, and this is our jobs now, is because we decided to treat ourselves like a business, decided to tell the world that we are professionals, we are a business, and you can trust us with your dollars, and you can pay us to do consulting, and you can trust that we are reliable enough podcasters to sell an ad on my show in 2021 and know that I will be there to fulfill it. And that doesn't just come. People don't just give that to you. Like at a certain size, your podcast is big enough, people have heard of it enough that they kind of assume you're a thing. But in podcasting particularly, that doesn't happen for you. And, I spent several years applying to jobs at all of the podcasting companies I'd ever heard of because I wanted so badly to work in the field, and it wasn't happening for me because I wasn't in the field yet, and no one's going to give you that entry-level break for the most part, unless you have something in common with them, be it a school or a previous internship or your parents play golf together or whatever. So we had no choice but to treat ourselves like professionals when nobody else would. And so that is why having somebody on your team who cares about the business side of things, and even if that is a Google Sheet spreadsheet with like 5 columns that keeps track of the, $65 you make every month on Patreon, that is a start. And that is something where you are treating this like a business that you want to grow. And I should say that doesn't have to mean making money. Like your goal doesn't have to be to make this your full-time job or even to make a lot of money from it. It can just be paying for your expenses. It can just be, donating money to charity or making sure that you can compensate your guests. But knowing that you are taking yourself seriously will help everybody else do the same.
For sure. I think the thing that leads into what we're going to talk about, the majority is building a team around, is every single person should be doing the thing that they love and that they're good at, and not doing the thing just because they're there and have to make up for a hole somewhere. I think about this like a Dungeons and Dragons party or a Lord of the Rings party or any sort of group of adventurers or team out there. Is like you don't go send your cleric or your healer to go do the fighting up there. And like you don't send your wizard to take all of the hits, right? It's like the person who is good at the thing should do the person who's good at the thing. So it's like just because you said not it and now you have to do the finances, like that doesn't make anybody happy. So there should be someone who's responsible for the business who likes it and is good at it. But also the person who is the writer or the person who is the most creative or excited to take on the creative thing, like should be the one who is held responsible for that. Like every single word that is on our podcasts, like not on the podcast, but like the episode description, the episode description, the episode titles, the title, everything around that, the summaries that happen on podcatchers, like that goes through me because I feel responsible for language and I care about the language. Like it shouldn't just be everybody getting their hand on the ball and saying, oh, I want to do this creative thing. I want to do this creative thing because I can write. I've written a sentence before. I've written a grocery list before. So having people lean into their strengths is really important as you do this, as you grow your team around you.
Yeah, and that can definitely be terrifying if you are somebody who is an individual that has up until now taken care of every part of podcast production. But there is a pro and a con, like giving something away to somebody else. Yes, it's letting go of that control. And if that's your personality type or something you're used to doing, that can feel like a downside. But then the upside is you have that much more energy to dedicate to the things that you excel at. And you get to let somebody else do the thing that they excel at. And, we'll talk about like tips for working with people or how to meet people, whatever interests you guys. And again, chat is there. So please leave us some questions, or at least an emoji every now and again to remind us that you are there. But it is so important to have people all contributing what makes them feel great and what they're great at. And the like upsides are manifold. If you're having a bad week, if you have a day job or home responsibilities, you have other people there to share the load. And you also have people to continue to grow with. If after 6 months or a year of doing the things the way that you've broken them out initially, you come together and say, hey, I actually really hate this thing and I hate every single day of the week that I have to do it. Or, I've actually really grown to love this part of my job that isn't a huge part so far, but I want to make it more. Our oldest show is coming up on 5 years old. And we have,
is that true?
Yeah, we passed our 4th anniversary. Our domain name came up for renewal in October. So it's coming back up on 5 now. And we have changed roles a lot. And that has kept the show interesting and fresh. It's kept us growing and feeling even more also appreciation for what each other has done over that time. So that might segue maybe into some like tips on working with people, or you want to start first with how to meet collaborators?
Well, I think it's important to talk about what Multitude is as composed in all of the other ways that people fit with each other within groups of podcasts.
Sure.
So what we said in the beginning, Multitude is a collective and studio. Studio just means we make podcasts like professionally. I guess I don't know how else to say it. Like creatively. Like if you commissioned us to make a podcast for you, we would. We also make podcasts in a way that like a movie studio makes a movie, in that like we can do all of the parts from pre-production to writing, recording, editing, and then marketing.
Yeah, someone could come to us with an idea and then a podcast pops out after 6 months of intense effort.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But the biggest difference is we are a collective and not a network. So a network is traditionally the thing that you might know from podcasting, like Maximum Fun is a network. Mm-hmm. Gimlet originally was a network. Now they're part of Spotify, which is both a platform because it's where you find podcasts, and they're a studio and because they make podcasts and they sell ads. So a network really is just a place that sells ads for the shows that they own probably some part of. There's some relationship between the network and the show of why they sell those ads. It is something that comes up a lot, especially with what's been happening over the last few weeks. A few people, as Black people, podcasters of color, have been sharing how they've gotten kind of a raw deal from white male executives about their ownership of shows. That a network encompasses top-down power. There is an executive at that network who is calling the shots and can tell you in so many different ways how that you may need to change your show to be on the network, or your show does not fit there, even though all they're really doing is selling ads for you.
Yeah, they can fire you, they can end your show. Like that is no longer in the podcaster's hands, even if the reason people tune into the show is because of that podcaster's work and personality and like status as a personality that people follow online.
Right. So, for example, people do not own the shows that they own on Gimlet. Like, they run it, but it is a property of Gimlet, and they have it. You can also think about this like on the internet, like if you worked at BuzzFeed and you make something at BuzzFeed, like a comic strip, BuzzFeed, because you made it there and they hired you, they own the IP of that comic strip. Mm-hmm. In a collective, which is what we have, there is no real top-down power. Everybody owns their own shows, and we lean on each other in all of these shows, which is for like quote-unquote core shows, and then our 7 in total, because it kind of mixes and matches the things that we make in the studio.
Like, our contract's literally 1 page long, and the only editorial control portion is like, no hate speech. And hey, if you post any, I can ask you to take it down. That is the extent of it.
If you're racist, we'll kick you out. Yeah. But like, that's it.
That's it.
Then it's the relationship of us, we're all working together, and then Amanda sells those ads. So the collective is in a model that we follow so that people still have control over their own shows. All of the hosts have 100% control over their shows, and they make their money from their Patreon. We don't take the money from the Patreon. It also helps that the 6 of us all like are mixed and matched throughout all of the shows.
Right.
So like, we have ownership of the shows, and then we do the work for the collective, which is both like working on the show itself, but also like larger collective things that Multitude needs to do, like putting together live shows and tweeting and coordinating, and we hop in the Slack and talk about all that stuff.
Yeah, sell merch and all of that. And it started out very much like a less codified form of what it is now, where, you know, my friend started a podcast and I promoted it on mine. Or, you know, there was a podcast event coming up and we had a group text and said like, oh, are you guys going to apply to this? Like, should we pitch a panel? Should we pitch a live show? Do you want to share an Airbnb? And it was all these ways where, like, yes, we did favors and help each other, but it was because if your show grows and you promote me, my show grows as well. And if your power in podcasting, if your following, if your professional connections grow, then because we have this kind of mutual aid network, I will also benefit from that. And Multitude as a now entity is just a kind of formalized version of that same principle.
For sure. So I think that going from there, we can figure out how we build this community together and how do we participate with the larger podcasting community.
Yeah, I mean, when we were first starting our oldest podcast, in my case, Spirits, we didn't know, my co-founders and I, anybody in podcasting. We just listened to a lot of podcasts, decided we wanted to make one, and, you know, put in the work and research to launch something that we felt was new. And the way we started making relationships in the podcasting industry was just being a vocal fan of other shows on the internet, and on our podcast recommending shows that we were really liking, on Twitter shouting out when, you know, a fiction podcast that we really loved started a new season, or when there was an episode of, you know, a show that we listened to religiously that would appeal to our audience, recommending that, and inviting other podcasters on our show, and vice versa. And that is just a really, you know, natural way to start making real relationships, and not just kind of saying, how can I like network my way into a job or into greater power or greater following? Because again, if you're doing this and you want to stick around, it's going to be a long-term game. You are going to want to make friendships and relationships that will last, not just for the benefit of potentially, you know, helping each other grow, but also these might be people that you collaborate with or start another show with, or work with in the future.
Absolutely. Honestly, it's funny because it's like, how many jobs are there around? You know, it's like, we're not trying to step on each other's neck to get like the one producing job that's out there.
Right.
We're all running these shows together, and we're creating like a podcast landscape and community, and we go in each other's shows. And like, there's nothing I like more than being a part of like going on someone else's show who I love so much and just like promoting the fuck out of it and just being like, I love this, please listen to this show.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I feel about Sad Boys so much. The show from Jordan Adika and Jarvis Johnson.
Yeah.
They're like, they're so funny, and I want to be funny with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun having friends, you know? And I think that like, as much as Twitter is a hellscape in so many ways, Twitter is the place that podcasters collect, because things are happening, but it's just the way that
like
people
journalism
communicate.
Adjacent. I don't really know what that was.
It's just something like that. But I think it has something to do with like the quickness of communication. Yeah. It is really just like constant, quick conversations. Mm-hmm. I think that like you don't have to post a ton on Twitter, but you do need to be participatory.
Mhm.
I think the thing that we get asked a lot is like, how do I make my social media better? It's like, well, you just need to put things on your actual social media. Like you need to run it like you run your show. If you have a specific tone, if you love a certain thing to death, which I'm sure you do because you have a podcast about it, you should just tweet that and do it on your Twitter. It's not about tweeting every single day. It's about, remember, you need to make stuff that makes people want to follow. You need to be participatory, and you need to have a voice. So doing that and really communicating with others is something really fun.
Yeah, and it might also be the case that you make friends who want to get into podcasting. Maybe you're the person who got there first, or you're figuring this out alongside somebody else, and you bring people from different facets of your life into a new medium. Like Eric and I knew each other from school before either of us was a podcaster. My original co-founder of Spirits, I knew from YouTube and other creative projects that I had done before podcasting that we then both decided to jump into podcasting together. That might be for you a university, a profession, some other kind of like extended network that you have, maybe just your local area. There is a makerspace or a library or a like creative professionals group that you meet people who might be interested in getting into podcasting or looking for somebody to help them take that next step. And I have done so much like look over a resume or a business plan or a spreadsheet for various friends as they got various projects together. And a lot of the time it's just, you help them the one time and then they go off, but maybe it turns into something like Multitude where just helping a friend out on their project ends up becoming a really like mutually beneficial, more formal kind of partnership.
Yes. There's something in the chat which is important to clarify. I guess using Gimlet as a jumping off point is that they're known for owning the IP of the things that people create. Radiotopia is amazing, and they're kind of like somewhere in between all of this stuff because Radiotopia, it's like a collective and a network in like mesh together. I think it's about just as it comes down to the respect of the creators and how that really creative relationship is. But the point of a network is that there is some sort of top-down power. Mm-hmm. Someone is running it and can tell you things about your show.
Yeah, or decide what comes in newly to the network as well.
Right.
And also a good question from Thomas about, if Multitude has ownership in the shows and vice versa. So Multitude has no ownership in any of the member podcasts that are part of our collective, for the exception of original shows that we start ourselves. So like Next Stop, for example, Multitude shares IP ownership with the creator, who is Eric. Right. And similarly, the shows don't have like a formal share in Multitude because we are not a classification company that issues shares. But what we do instead is any money that we make together benefits all of us. We share in it together. So our multi-crew, for example, is our membership program where people pledge to support not one or other of the podcasts, but Multitude as a whole. So that money goes towards stuff that we all use together, like travel and housing when we all attend conferences together, or money to front live shows that we all do together, or rent on our studio.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, that actually is part of it. Again, we participate as a collective because we want to make everybody better. Something that we say all the time is the rising tide raises all boats. When podcasting raises their standards of creation, it makes it easier for truly everybody, then podcasting will become better. So something that we really care about doing is making resources, free resources that you can find on our website, which is coincidentally free, and you can just go do whatever. So we've written a ton of articles just to spread our knowledge and make people who've been starting out feel like they have a foothold. Neither Amanda and I have formal radio or audio training. We figured this out. I mean, I learned editing from my coworker who is now our head of production when I met him at my like quasi media job, and he just like helped me out. Yeah. So it's a lot of us figuring this stuff up on the fly because there really wasn't a lot of podcasting resources for free that you could get outside of an NPR newsroom in 2016, 2017.
Yeah. And I mean, we're not also coming from a place of like telling you the one way to do it. We are documenting the way we do things in the hope that it's helpful to somebody. So even if you don't end up following the path that we suggest, we are here to just say like, hey, this is what I found. And it's almost like yelling from one end of the cave, like this is what's in this part of the cave. And then if you go into different parts, at least you know what's in this one. So it's something that we try to do for everybody's benefit. It ends up also being a helpful way to like get our name out there. And when we originally launched Multitude as a company, instead of just being people doing individual podcasts, that was one of the ways that we could like say the name Multitude. Is not just, you know, in our podcast at the end in the credits or on the website, but it's saying, hey, let's put all of our brains together and make something that can be useful to other people. So in thinking about, you know, again, how do you kind of form relationships and become a part of the podcast and the many podcasting communities that are out there, writing down what you know, helping other people out, and, you know, just looking for opportunities to be nice and to make friendships is going to be a sustainable and also beneficial strategy.
Yes. And remember, you can follow all of those at our website, multitude.productions/resources. And there's also, if you just go to multitude.productions, there's a resources tab right at the top. So this could be anything from just like a single one-off blog post, like we did a guide on how to transcribe, which has been really helpful for podcasters. We focused it around a Dungeons and Dragons show, but it really works for everybody. We did an in-depth dive into how we made our studio and how much money we spent to make that studio and what you could do to save money or if you really wanted to go all out. And we just published a very, very large PDF resource on how we made a fiction podcast as we were making Next Stop, our audio sitcom. It was with relationship with Patreon. We published 8 in an introduction and 7 parts and then a budget appendix. So like it's over 50 pages of Next Stop fiction goodness, and that's all for free. You can just find it.
Yeah, again, we were working with what we had, and that might not be applied 100% to your situation, but we hope that everybody can take at least something away from it.
Yeah, it's something that we really wanted to do because we published our budget. I mean, we said how much that we spent on this, and we know that it's something for everybody, both for the independent podcaster and for companies. So a company should look at the amount of money we spent and be like, oh, wow, we totally spend way more money than that, but we could be allocating our money better, and we should be hiring more people to do things. Like, we can't just give money to one person who's going to compose everything and sound design everything and run the recording sessions. And for independent people who look at the amount of money and said, wow, that's so much more than I have, we do give a lot of, the majority of our resources have nothing to do with money. And you can still run all these things and barter and trade and work with your friends to make up all this stuff.
Yeah, or if you're starting a podcast and nobody is making any money at first, but you sign an email or a 2-page Google Doc that says, when we start making money, we're going to split it 4 ways. Our budget can also help you look at, the relative kind of weighting of all of the tasks. And if your goal is to find a way for this to be sustainable and split evenly between a bunch of people, then you can kind of mix and match those different line items and say, okay, well, for Next Stop, I was executive producer, and I also was sort of the studio manager and the catering person and PA on set, and giving my talents the way I could. Or if you want to say like, hey, me as the creator of this podcast, I'm going to take half the profits, and then the rest of the team will split it, in these other ways according to our relative jobs. The point is not that you have to have a certain amount of money to make a podcast or make a fiction podcast, but just to give you a sense of how people are doing this and the options that are in front of you. Because again, one of the pros and cons of being in such a new industry is that there is so little information, there is so much freedom, and that is great in that you can, there's no one playbook, and you can sort of make whatever choices you want, but it's also terrifying and, in a way, its own form of gatekeeping, that only the 1% of people working on podcasts who have a full-time job in podcasting or in radio have the institutional tools, and not even then necessarily, to understand budgets, to understand hiring, to know about IP ownership, and all this stuff. So again, even something as small as comparing notes with people or reaching out to someone else who's in podcasting and being like, hey, who do you host with? How is it going? Do you like them? Do your customer service emails get answered? Or, this host quoted me this much money for dynamic hosting. What is your rate? Just comparing those notes is another way to sort of decentralize that concentration of professional currency and information that exists right now.
Right. I think on one side you have, I want to create this information and give it to the people who don't know it, or indies trying to do it for themselves. But at the same time, you want to give them to companies because they don't know it, and then it is detrimental to the podcast landscape.
Mhm.
I mean, there was a listserv where somebody at a very large podcasting company was like, hey, how do you make a fiction podcast? How do you make a budget for this? And like, that is so dangerous to all of the people who that person could have hired
Mhm.
if they just like, all right, $100,000 and that's going to go 75,000 of that is going to go to a director who did 2 movies and wants to get into podcasting, and then 25,000 else is going to go to production, and then like one person is going to be slammed doing all of that work. Like if everybody's on the same page, hopefully the hiring pool gets bigger and everyone is going to get a bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah, and that might be a good time too to talk a little bit about the kind of mechanics of working with other people. And early on in our podcasting, we talked a lot about working with your friends or balancing podcasting with full-time jobs, as all of us did until, in different cases, 2018 for us, 2019 for some of our other colleagues. And it is difficult. So there are definitely some tips that we have come up with. I started, in all cases, we started podcasts either solo or with friends. And so the first and most important thing that we found was splitting out your work-related communication to your personal communication.
Yes.
And I don't want to have like a Pavlovian anxiety response whenever, Eric Schneider, editor of Spirits, texts me, because if I assume that means there's something wrong with the file or the hosting or the episode that's supposed to go up at 5 a.m. tomorrow and it's midnight, that would suck. And it did suck when that happened to me. So we find it really important to kind of break out your communication. We have a Slack for work, but that could even just mean, a group message on Facebook or WhatsApp or Signal compared to, MMSing each other otherwise.
Yeah, we don't text each other. Texting is not for business.
Texting is for fun. So Slack is free. There's a free plan that is fine, or Discord or whatever other program you use. But that is really important. And secondly, it can also feel weird when it's your friend and you're like, hey, can we have a meeting? But it is important to have meetings, and sort of 2 kinds. One is when you meet together with your team on a regular basis, to kind of deal with the tasks that are in front of you for the week. So like in our case, it's, every Monday sharing what's on our list for the week. And if we need any help, or just to give each other a sense of like what everybody is working on, because we're all in different locations. That's really important. But secondly,
I keep forgetting that Cleveland isn't in Central, but we're in 3 different cities. We're in New York, LA, and Cleveland. So it's very important that we are all on the same page.
It is. And
Long Island. Long Island's not, for all of you people who don't know anything about New York State, Long Island is far away from New York City. It is, transportation is hard here. You got to get on a train that sometimes it smells and it doesn't come at the time you want to. Sometimes it doesn't come on time at all. And then you got to go to a nasty train station. Train station is pretty nasty. I'm just saying that it's Long Island and New York City is far enough away that I would consider it 4 different places.
It definitely is. And the second kind of meeting is that it's important to have time on the calendar where you get together and talk about how things are going. And in our case, it's a monthly meeting with the hosts of each podcast, where we just sit down and say to each other, like, hey guys, how's it going? Do you have any complaints? Do you have anything that you want to change? Any ideas that have come to you? And just the simple fact of having time on the calendar where all you do is sit down and like talk about the project, not the thing that has to happen next, not, the draft that's overdue or the guest you have to book for the next episode, but the bigger picture is a really, really helpful way to make sure that if anybody has an issue, there is an allocated time to address it. It's not like I have to think every day, man, is now the time that I have to bring up a thing with my friend that has been bothering me, or send that ominous, like, hey, can we talk text? That sucks.
Or even right before you record, it's like, hey, before we record, can we talk about this thing?
Right.
Which is the worst. And then it's like, well, I guess we need to talk about ghosts for 60 minutes. All right, let's do it.
Or after recording, I am so sweaty as I am in every season. And now let's talk, for 45 minutes when we're already tired. But no, and sometimes that meeting is going to be like, yeah, everything's chill. I like doing this. Okay, goodbye. And that's a great thing. But knowing that you have that opportunity, both to make yourself reflect if you are somebody who likes to just kind of focus on the next thing and not really worry about the big picture, or just to give everybody a chance to bring something up that's bothering them, is really important and can happen for teams of any size, even if it's you and an editor, who helps out on some episodes sometimes. Maybe it's not monthly, maybe it's every other month or whatever it might be. But it's just time to sit down and check in with each other is one of those things that, like, as soon as we realized that, I was like, oh, that's why workplaces do this. Like, I get it now. it is actually helpful to have one-on-ones or like group meetings. So some habits of the workplace you can recreate in your own work environment.
For sure. I think that asking for feedback that you actually want to receive is important. For someone who creates as many shows as I do and also edits, I really don't like listening to my own voice. I really don't. It's especially, and I talk so much, especially at our Dungeons and Dragons show where I'm the dungeon master, where I'm just like creating things and making dumb voices. I just don't like hearing myself. So although I need to listen to things for creative reasons and make sure that, like, even if it's my own show, I need to figure out like how the creative things are going to fit together, how the story is being told, if the segments are being executed in so many different ways. I really like being able to give this to other people to give me notes on what's happening. And so I get a perspective outside of myself. Because I don't like listening to myself, I'm usually harder on it. I don't think it's good.
That's probably better than loving the sound of your own voice and being like, more of that. No cuts.
No
yes,
cuts.
Yes, please.
Super raw. Just 2 hours of whatever, man. No edits. But I think it's important when you when you have a collective or you have a team, you can give it to somebody else and they'll be honest with you. But they'll also probably like send you a bunch of emojis when you say something hot fire. And I think that asking for the feedback is important, but then being very like specific about the feedback you want to receive. Because what I think is like the opposite of someone giving you a critique is when you give something to someone and they're like, no, it's perfect. Like no.
Is there any better feeling?
It's just no notes. It's not even that it's great. It's just that this is the best possible version it's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's like if you ask about something specific and they'll be like, hey, can you just tell me about how this segment is working? If my introduction to this thing is going well, then they'll be like, no, this is totally fine. But like if you go on there and then they're like, hey, your mixing is totally off on this. It's like, oh, I didn't ask and I haven't worked on it yet, but thanks for pointing that out to me when I was doing this.
Yeah. Or saying, something I learned as well is there's a lot of stuff that like I'll do or Eric will do or Brandon, our head of production, will do in our roles for Multitude Productions, the company, that we want to like give everybody a heads up, like, hey, we're gonna be posting this later, like here it is in advance, like just FYI. Just to keep everybody in the loop, where it's not like theirs necessarily to comment on, but I just want to put it out there in case there's like a glaring error. And so sometimes I'll say like, hey, sending this newsletter at, noon tomorrow. If you have any essential edits, let me know. Or, hey, this is a draft. I'm going to pick it up back again on Friday. I'd love your feedback on any aspect of it. Or like, this is the Instagram graphic. I already made it, so I don't want to change it. So if there's like a glaring problem, let me know. More context to what you're asking for, particularly when you are remote, as almost all of us probably are right now, where it's harder to get context, it's harder to get tone. You can't like see someone walk into the office that day and be like, yikes, it seems like you're really tired. I'm gonna like save this, unnecessary critique for another time. That is lacking. And so being able, again, to check in with people. And also if you have that knowledge of yourself to say like, I am underwater right now. If this can wait till Monday, please, let's wait. Yes. Or, I need to get this done. If there is, again, something that needs to change, let me know. Otherwise, like I prefer not to hear it. The more honest you are, the better. And that'll really improve your relationships with your coworkers on both sides of that.
Yeah. I think this also ties to something that we said a little bit earlier, which is, whenever I'm recording, I do this when I'm recording and when I'm streaming, I'm like, my body's like, oh, hell yeah, time to burp. Let's do burps. Yeah.
You didn't even chug any like soda before this.
Oh yeah, because I'm always chugging soda before we record. Something that we've said.
A Simpsonian like 2-liter orange drink.
Simpsonian. Jesus Christ.
Patent it now.
Oh my God. Yeah. Get in the chat. Tell us how funny we are. Really appreciate it. Something that we
ask me for the feedback, please.
I only want good. It is worth it also when you're talking about feedback. Like, hey, just tell me some good things about me. Like, I don't want any negatives. Just tell me the good things.
Yeah.
That is only reserved when you really need it. Something that we said a little while ago about the person who is the best at the thing doing the thing. That means that the person who is best at it probably knows best. And it's respecting each other's expertise when you're in an issue. So when we have this like triumvirate of me, Amanda, and Brandon, if there's any question about business stuff, Amanda ultimately gets to make the final call. If there's anything about creative stuff, which is a little murkier when you think of just creative things, but just like structure, word choice,
external facing.
Yes, external facing thing, pre-production, that happens to me, and anything that has to do with the actual production and post-production of shows that goes to Brandon to make the final call. I think that respecting that autonomy, even though Amanda is the CEO and makes the final call, I think that like the person who knows the most should be saying the thing that will ultimately have final say. Like they do know the best. We also have a community manager who tells us about our tweets because she puts in the work to look at our tweets and look at our data and figure out how we can do better. And I think it's important to respect people's autonomy, and you can't just like throw your 2 cents in just because you have something to say. You're like, no, actually my Instagrams are better and I don't have to do hashtags. Like you could, it's like, that's fine, but the person who is responsible for our social media is saying this, so we try to respect what they say.
Yeah, and that's also in terms of like leading or growing a team over time. The opportunity to do the thing that you're good at is the most essential part of confidence and growth in a job. And if you're listening to this, you probably do or want to think of your podcast as a job. So even if it is not paying you or it is costing you money or nobody told you like, yes, you are a podcaster, the fact is it doesn't matter. You deciding that you are is enough. And knowing that you have opportunities to do a thing that you feel good at or to do it and do it a little bit better than you did last time, that is such a good feeling. So think about opportunities that you have to give that to somebody else and to give them the opportunity to do the thing that they're good at and to contribute to the whole. So when Eric Schneider, does reports on our statistics every week, when Mike Schubert scouts out new conferences and festivals for us to pitch events to, those are them, every time they do it, building on previous expertise and giving what they can give to the greater whole. And the great news again is that like it's stuff that I either wouldn't do or wouldn't have time to do or would sort of resent doing because they aren't in my main sort of bucket of like my top 5 skills that I like using at work. And that is again, like putting your thing to use for the team is so much, I don't know, it's like so much greater return on investment energy than it is for me to try to do 10 things I'm like met at.
Well, I think we learned this because we saw worse ways of how it's done.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to totally shit on all of the bad jobs that I had before, but I could. But we've seen a lot of ways where social media is an incredible example. You point at the youngest person in the room and you say, hey, can you run the data analysis for all of our social media and write tweets and write graphics and put it all out there and make sure we have a TikTok presence? Like you can't just do that. And like, or somebody being like, hey, actually, no, I want to start writing things just because I took a college writing course, like, and then being allowed to do that when other people are languishing and don't get that opportunity. So it is worth looking into people's skills because it is disheartening when other people get to do the things that you think that you're the best at, but also you're shooting yourself in the leg because you're not thinking about it clear enough. We are rounding out to one of our last segments here. So if you have any other questions, please get in the chat and ask us questions. We like talking about so many things.
And saying the phrase, get in the chat.
Yeah, just like get in the chat.
Get in the chat.
So yeah, we're going to come up on our Q&A dedicated section in a little bit. So ask your questions now. Hey, Amanda, let's say it's quarantine and I'm inside and this totally hypothetical, but there's a quarantine happening. I wouldn't know what that is. And you're inside and you want to work with other people, but you don't know how to talk to them.
Yeah.
And you don't know who you can look to help make a podcast. Where do you think you can find them?
I mean, the main thing, like we said earlier, is being nice to people whose work you respect. And that can definitely feel terrifying, as it was for me when I was like, why should I tweet about how good this episode of The Illusionist is? Helen Salzman knows how good The Illusionist is, but tweeting about it anyway feels good to me. And hopefully it feels good to the podcaster who reads it. And that is the start too of, if you know how you use social media, right? Like if a person replies to you a couple of times, you get to know them, you click on their profile, you check out what they do, you read their webcomic or follow their dog's Instagram. And that is socializing. And that is for internet kids like us, that is the way that you build relationships. And it is even truer in a like hyper online, particularly hyper on Twitter industry like podcasting. So that is definitely where I would start. And I think to kind of like take it one level deeper, and to kind of move on from like, I'm going to compliment their work or share their work on my podcast. That might be, emailing them if you have a good idea, and only if you have a genuinely good idea for how to collaborate with somebody.
Don't just tweet at them and be like, we should work together.
Don't just be like, hey, Roman Mars, I really enjoy you. Please recommend my podcast on your podcast. No, it has to be one layer deeper, and to say like, hey, person with, this great podcast that could complement mine. Do you want to work together on an episode? I am available as a guest, and I could talk about agency. If you would like that, I am a podcaster. I have equipment. My schedule is pretty open, and if not, no worries. Like that is maybe that feels terrifying at first, but that is a really great email to send, particularly if you're not just thinking, who are the biggest podcasters that I could reasonably work with, but would this audience appreciate what I'm doing? And therefore, if you do end up going on that podcast, they will be even more likely to actually follow through and to convert to becoming listeners of yours.
Yes. I think there is something about pitching to your peers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't just shoot for an incredibly big podcast because you want to be on a big podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're small, there are other small shows that you can help grow on each other, and your audiences probably don't know each other at all.
Yeah.
So there really is a chance. Like, let's say you have a podcast that gets 1,000 downloads, and you have another podcast that gets 1,000 downloads.
Mm-hmm.
Probably that 1,000 downloads are separate from each other,
mm-hmm.
and it's not the same person. So like then you have the opportunity for both of you to get 2,000 downloads if you do a guest on one and a guest on another.
Yeah.
So I think there is really an opportunity for this. I will say also, Multitude was created for this. We were guesting on each other's shows so much, they're like, let's just like work together all the time. And then we did. So now we promote each other all of the time on all of our shows. We guest on each other's shows all the time. We do live shows together. We pitch panels together. Like we do this because we're uniting, and we're holding on to all of our IP and all of our money that we make. And we're just kind of like friends. Like I didn't give Amanda 10% of my show just so that she would be on Join the Party. Like she owns a stake in it, and then we work together, and then I come on Spirits and make amazing games that everybody loves. And because I do it, but I do it for fun. Like I want to do it, and because it's a Multitude thing. And it promotes my name, but like it's also Join the Party, integrating with Spirits, integrating with Next Stop when we work together.
Exactly. So working with each other. I'm trying to think of other ways that you could sort of pitch or reach out to people. If you have services if you're a person who knows how to edit or is learning how to edit,
yes.
Maybe it's putting on your Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, like, hey, I am looking for editing gigs, or I'm looking to trade editing services with somebody in exchange for graphic design, resume help, music, what else, like writing or editing transcription. So it doesn't have to be money. And, even now hiring somebody is a big financial commitment, and it's not always one we can do. But with 6 people who all work on podcasting full-time or close to full-time, I can say like, hey, when you have time, can you check out this draft? Or we formalize it even more. And now instead of just saying like, hey, Eric, can you read over this copy of this panel I'm pitching to whatever convention? Like that is now in Eric's domain.
Right. I'm writing it, but I'm doing it on behalf of everybody.
Right.
Because they trusted me that I know what I'm doing when I write the thing. And also it's going to be in everybody's best interest. Yeah.
And so that might start with you just saying, I am looking to edit someone's podcast. And then you go in, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 with the podcast 2 hosts. And now 5 years later, all of you do it full time. And that might, again, not always happen. That might not be your goal. That might not be interesting to you. But being able to just sort of put out 2 people who might want to see it, like your weak social ties, that like study thing. It doesn't have to be your best friend or somebody that you meet who is specifically in the podcasting industry who might see that offer and think it's really interesting. So I would definitely, don't discourage or discount people who don't yet do a podcast, because you could be meeting somebody who wants to do it for the first time with you.
Absolutely. All right, we're coming to our Q&A, so you should get your questions in the chat so that we can A those Qs. While we do that, I'm going to A those Qs.
Oh, no.
Get in the chat, tell me about A and those Qs. What I am going to do is plug everything on Multitude until we get a question.
Oh, yeah, that's what I thought we should do, too.
That's a great idea. So you can follow us on Twitter at Multitude Shows. You can go to our website, multitude.productions, for more information for consulting if that's something that you or someone you know might want. And all of our resources are all on that website.
Yeah, if you want to hire one of us to listen to your podcast and tell you ways that you can improve, that is possible. You can do that.
And we know that you're all beginners, so we have very reasonable rates, we promise. You can also listen to all of our shows, which I think are all really good. There's Spirits, a mythological dive into myths, a boozy dive into myths and legends, looking at ghost stories and myths and legends and folklore from a queer and feminist lens. There's Join the Party, what I think is the most accessible and best sounding Dungeons and Dragons podcast out on the market. There's Potterless, where a grown man reads Harry Potter for the first time and has a lot of very strong takes about it.
Doesn't always love it, which neither do I. It's great.
I don't love lots of things about Harry Potter. I think it's worth talking about. Horse, a basketball podcast, which is not focused on the wins and losses, but on the stories and beefs of the NBA and of basketball. There is Head, Heart, Gut, which is the multi-crew only podcast, which is where a game show and debate show that we've devised, where we argue about what is the best of a group of three things using our head, logos, heart, ethos. No,
Pathos.
Head, logos, heart, pathos, and
ethos.
gut, ethos.
Yeah.
And that is a weekly show and changes as we have a big debate in the fourth week.
We're doing a salty, sweet umami this month, and it's the more abstract the topics are, the more silly it is. It's
very funny. We've done Harry Potter, the Harry Potter trio. We've done both Marvel and DC superheroes, but we also done tastes and Pokemon starters.
Colors, red, blue, yellow.
Colors was
very
good.
Contentious.
We did Fork, Spoon, Knife, which is really fun.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
And then our newest two shows, Next Stop is a sitcom that was created and written by Eric and produced by the team at Multitude. It is the story of your late 20s when your friends are maybe moving on with their lives and you're kind of figuring out what to do next. It sounds like a wonderfully campy 90s sitcom, and that is very much what we were out to do. The theme song is so catchy, and the season just wrapped up this past week, so you can check it out in your podcast app. And Meddling Adults, which is adults solving children's mysteries for charity. So it is extremely entertaining and way more challenging than one would expect. So those are our shows. And we have a question here about what business training I had to do Multitude beforehand. Not very much. I have a degree in English. When finishing my degree with crippling student loans, realized that the only paid
crippling student loans.
With the only paid internship I could find was in at a bank. So long story short, ended up working in finance for 3 years in kind of managing people and taking classes that I was putting together for my interns. So my job didn't have very much to do with business or accounting or finance, but when we had these college sophomores coming in to do summer internships, I was like, hey, what would I like to learn about? Oh, let's sit down with a person in banking, a person in trading, a person in sales, whatever, and like learn what their job is. And take all of the weirdly janky e-learning courses that a bank that's 200 years old has on their servers. So with that kind of cobbled together knowledge, I then went to work at a university helping advise students who wanted to start businesses. So again, I wasn't doing the advising, I was just doing like tweets for the department, but I got it to sat in on all of the kind of one-on-one advising sessions and seminars that we put together for the students. And finally, with at that point, 5 years of learning from the sidelines when I wasn't doing the thing I was being paid to do, I worked as the COO of a web marketing startup that sold sponsorships for YouTubers. And it was very much a startup environment where I burned out, after not even a year of working there. But in that time, I did get to see firsthand what it was like to sell sponsorships and also to do things like rent an office in New York City. A whole experience, let me tell you, get business insurance, get people on payroll, find health insurance for a startup. And so all of those things I did again the next year at the same time of year. It's like a weird, repeating of myself, but this time for Multitude. So a lot of being around people as they did these things and a little bit of experience doing it for someone else when I wasn't also responsible for generating my own income. And that is definitely a different thing. But every week I have to Google something that I need to do. And I try to, not let that stop me. Most people who start businesses haven't been told how to start a business, and you have to try, lean on others, and know that, you're doing your best because no one else is sitting here in this seat doing the thing that you decided you were going to be in charge of doing.
I will say to you, because I know that you don't feel that, but that is a lot more business schooling than most people have. And I think it's worthwhile knowing that you are advocating on behalf of everybody to do business things and represent themselves and giving fair ads to the people into Multitude and also the people we sell ads for. And I think that it's admirable and why I like working for you. You do know what you do. And for the fact that you did this for other people, but the other people didn't do as well of a job following up on your information as you did.
Mm-hmm.
Like you doing this for someone running a startup that creates that much burnout and doing this for a bank and for a university. Like as someone who knew you for a long time, like I don't know if they took that information to heart necessarily, but being able to do this for yourself and as Multitude has done good things, like I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. It's definitely great and satisfying to know that we can ultimately do whatever we think is best. And that freedom, it's easy to focus on the fact that like I don't have anybody else paying my paycheck, or why is health insurance so expensive, help, etc. But ultimately, no one at a major company can fire me because my show doesn't fit in with their idea of what they should be making.
Right.
Or nobody can decide to pivot the business away from audio to video, back to audio, to GIFs and TikTok, and then back again. So our fate is in our own hands, and that's why we come so hard for the idea of a collective, the idea for owning your own IP, for putting together your own podcast team, and not just relying on a company saying yes to you to get into audio and start to do it professionally. Like you can start to do it for yourself. No one's selling ads for you, learn how to sell ads. Nobody wants to hire you to be an editor, edit your own podcast.
Yes.
And that is definitely hard. That doesn't make money right away. And that is going to require a lot of energy and time, but it also doesn't require anyone's permission. So if you're waiting for permission to do it, this is your permission.
Yes. Doing it for yourself is kind of its own reward right now, even if you're not making tons of money. We're not, I'll say we're not making tons of money, but like, I don't think no one's going to lay me off. And I think that's the best thing that I'm feeling right now, which is something that goes into Thomas's question.
Yeah.
How have the past weeks and months somehow affected how you think about your work? I think that this was happening before, and we can say this as Deadspin was gutted, as College Humor was shut down, and as a lot of people are losing their jobs. Every Gothamist lost their thing and then got it back from WNYC, thank God. And also what's happening at Bon Appetit and at so many media places right now. Like, I am proud that we are making the choices that we're making, and that we're staying true to our message. Like, we are working and doing the best that we can and trying to do the things that we believe in, and not for someone who has the integrity of their work on the line.
Yeah, and from a mechanical perspective, it's also so important to have multiple revenue streams where, we are not just relying on advertisers to pay our bills. We're not just relying on a parent company allocating us budget, and we are not just relying on something like live touring. Yes, all of those things, with the exception of the parent company budget, like we need sponsorships, merch, live shows, and the membership businesses of Patreon and the Multi-Crew to make this thing work. So when any one of them takes a hit, like many of them have over the last few months, others come through. Our Patreon has grown because people realize how important it is to support artists that they care about. Our memberships have grown. So, having those multiple streams, having full control, or as full as we can, over the ways that we make money and the ways we talk to our audience. There's nobody that controls my RSS feed and can decide what does and doesn't go on it. So that is, again, terrifying, a lot of responsibility, and we put in a lot of effort compared to the money we're making. But for us, that control is totally worth it.
I will say also, we knew how to remotely record before this was a problem.
Yes, that's true.
I've never felt more prepared for a situation than like, oh no, we can't be in the same studio anymore.
Everyone's like, okay, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
All right.
We listen to shows and they're like, oh no, can we have more than 2 people on a podcast? I'm like, dog, we've been running 5 people podcasts for years.
Yeah.
I've been running a Dungeons and Dragons show remotely for years. So that has just been something exciting. Like, you have skills that other people don't have skills for. And that's something, like, if you know how to use a microphone that doesn't, even if you do have one that plugs into a USB port, but like, if you have a mixer, like, you know so much more about what's happening here. Like, the fact that we are doing streaming right now is such like a rarefied skill set that everyone needs. And I think that you can really look in that in the like remote recording media landscape that exists.
Totally. So I think as we're going to wrap up for now, you can find our Twitter handles and our shows and all of the links and resources that we mentioned, as well as our Multi-Crew membership program on our website, multitude.productions. And with that, I will hand it back over to Martin. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Hi. I don't know if I don't know if people can hear me. Hopefully they can. So to say a big thank you to Amanda and Eric for doing this tonight. I've never been on live stream before. Hello, everyone who's been watching all these weeks. Thanks for tuning in. Next week, there's quite a big group of people. Lewakowski, Gregory Warner, Daniel Estrin, and Tina Antolini, who are going to be talking about finding the podcast narrative in news reporting. So tune in for that same time next Saturday. Come along and say hi. And do follow up all of those resources that Amanda and Erica shared on their website, multitude.productions/resources, and follow them on Twitter and all that kind of stuff, and have a listen to their shows. And if you're watching on Sunday morning because it's a bit too late on a Saturday night, hello from the past, and hopefully see you next week. All right, bye.